Welcome all my LGBTQ family, ladies, gentlemen, gentlemanly ladies, bros, sisters, and sisters, bros. Coffee with Dragon, December 12th, although this perhaps, maybe, perhaps not, will be posted 7 days or so after the recording, since I have another one which I want to post, which haven't posted yet, but which is important since it has discussed and addressed a topic that haven't and so relevant today. Question of conspiracy theories, of course. First, going back on Coffee with Dragon, first and foremost, do not believe in conspiracy theories such as the Illuminati, the New World Order, or what have you. Do believe that there are people who conspire to do certain things, conspiracies of that nature, but the ones that are circulating on the internet, as creative as they are, they can be harmful, by the way. People believe and act on those to harm others and create violence and create distress and all sorts of paranoid sentiments and feelings in society, and it seems that has been increasing. And people have saying that from new music video to any event is controlled by the Illuminati, New World Order, and other individuals such as XYZ. Anyways, that's not the topic for today. Today, the topic of discussion is gonna continue on a note on the recent development in the Huawei's case, and drink a little bit of coffee. By the way, instant coffee. I'm trying a new instant coffee now. Last time I did instant coffee also. Found it out special, so because of financial pressures, living in a financially precarious situation at the moment. It's gonna be this coffee. So anyways, Huawei's chief financial officer was arrested, Meng, she's called Meng, in Canada on December 1st, and on accusations from the US government of Huawei involvement with a company doing businesses with Iran. Of course, there's United States and allied on sanctions on Iran on certain dealings. So there was that accusations with other accusations of spying on behalf of the Chinese government, specifically the Chinese Communist Party, which of course is the ruling party of China. We have been involved, of course, in doing business with China for a long time now. I'm gonna say we, saying me as a world citizen, of course, LGBTQ world citizen, but Canada, United States, and generally members of the G7, the G20, the West, if you want to use that appellation. So we've been doing since 1984 a lot of business, increasingly with China, of course. One special notation or point that I want to raise is that the United States of America, USA, is the biggest market. That is the biggest buyer, biggest consumer market, meaning buyers in the United States. Biggest consumer, where people from all nations want to, the biggest market in terms of buying, importing, that is, if you want to use the term import, biggest importers. And of course, China is the biggest exporter, or the biggest, would even go so far as say the biggest producer of goods. So not just exporter, but also producer, right? They go kind of hand in hand in economics, commerce. You got to produce a lot, export a lot, so. And of course, the trade war, which started, of course, by Trump and his administration, of first set a few months ago, 9 months ago, and then 4 or 6 months ago, 2 sets of tariffs have been imposed on several. From my understanding, last time it was on $200 billion, and another one before it was on $156 billion. Of course, that's not the total amount, but a certain percentage on those amounts of goods, which ranges from 10, 12, 11%, what have you, on those goods. So the total amount is in the billions nonetheless, because 10% of 200 billion is 20 billion. It's a staggering huge number, of course, which at the macro level influences our as buyers in the market. of goods, such as ranging from hats to socks to shoes to even more goods such as not coffee and things of that nature, because China doesn't export a lot of coffee, but other goods, even consumer goods, edible called consumer goods, such as fish, canned fish, or canned products. There is on the market, at least here in Montreal, Canada, there's quite a few that are products of China, and of course a lot of gadgets, electronics, and things like that. There have been a few exempted items, of course, but nonetheless. So this has triggered a diplomatic crisis, but it's related to the trade war. Now, Huawei is an interesting corporation, and I'm learning more about it. First and foremost, want to call for a peaceful resolution of conflicts, whether they're trade, commercial, financial, social, even spiritual, so that we can grow on in peace, peace, peace. Cannot straight enough. Peace, peace, peace. Of course, with justice and fairness, and free trade. I'm also calling for balanced, fair trade, also harmonious. So Huawei overtook Apple as the second producer and actually seller, largest producer of smartphones. This was a huge event. From my understanding, of course, people might differ from a day, a month, a week, that when it actually happens, it's numbers, and of course official numbers, others estimates, but nonetheless it's officially recognized, admitted, that they overtook Apple as the second biggest, become the second biggest producer, seller, exporter even of Huawei, of smartphones. The second, by the way, is Samsung. The first is Samsung. So first it was Samsung, then it was Apple, and Huawei was third. And a few months ago, or last year, 2017, in November, about maybe, it overtook and it maintained that position. Now, people have speculated, and of course, you can speculate a lot of things. What's fact? Who made decisions? And this and that. Go into details. That requires a little bit of more discernment, more investigation, and more questions, such as, of course, questions. For example, G5. What is that? Huawei is involved. It's supposedly here in Canada, in my country of Canada, of course. Huawei has been involved in the 5G network with cell towers. The new 5G, faster, speedier gigabytes per second now. Technically, or the whole technical aspect of this, I'm not an expert, just know general theory, so we'll not go into that. But nonetheless, of course, 5G is the next, seen as the next big thing in cell phones. Of course, now smartphones, most of us went from cell phones to smartphones, right? We connect to the internet, and if anybody hears this, please give me an article or something, or a summary of the technical aspects of how it actually works, the whole technical details, or if you can direct me towards more understanding, to acquire wisdom and knowledge in this telecommunications matter. I'm truly a student, one aspire to be a student of it, to be informed, of course, generally. So 5G is the next best thing, and supposedly Huawei made a lot of progress in the 5G capabilities. We'll call it capabilities because that's what it basically is, right? It's the next best thing, but not officially stable as a market, as a what do I call it, product for people to buy. Or that is a plan with the cell phones and what have you for the 5G network. It's in development, right? It's testing, it's being tested and what have you, right? So Huawei, what's your opinion? What do you think? There's a lot of possibilities. Sure, it's possible. I'm not gonna rule it out. Sure, it's possible that some people got, because of greed, selfishness. A lot of people deal with that on a daily basis, right? To make a little bit more profit. Supposedly, it's alleged that they cut ties with the company Skycom, or Sky something, that's alleged to have done business with Iran between 2009 and 2014. My understanding is correct. In contravention of the sanctions for which the United States issued, from my understanding, it was an arrest that was issued in August 22nd. Not sure about the date, it could be September 22nd, let's say August 22nd. Fact check me, please, and this and that. But it was issued that arrest warrant for Meng, the chief financial officer of Huawei. And there's a bit of confusion as to how it happened that she got arrested on the Vancouver airport, transitioning from a plane going into another. And from my understanding, it was the RCMP, which is the sort of our national police force in Canada, similar to the United States FBI and perhaps to the FSB in Russia and such. But keep in mind that in Canada, of course, we have a different judicial system. It's more independent, because some people were calling for Trudeau and other members of government to intervene to decree that she should not be detained and she should be released. But it's a different matters, and some people have went into discussion because, of course, in China they have a Communist Party of China is the one-party state still. China today, it's still a officially communist state, so ruled by the socialist principles, if you want, like Mao Zedong called communism or socialism, and they interjectively in the constitution in their land use both socialism and communism as they were. I'm not going to go into the ideology of the distinction between the appellations, because there's some yes and no, and some do not make distinctions. But nonetheless, like socialism with Chinese characteristics, Mao Zedong, right, the founder of People's Republic of China, because of course China went through a period of war and revolution, and Second World War, invasion. I'm not going to go into this history of China, of course, Japanese invasion and conquest of a lot of mainland China, and then the Civil War. It's a history of conflict, of course. But now 2018, this China, of course, has risen. Since 1984, of course, they had slowly emerged to become the world's biggest producer of goods, mostly consumer durable items, durable or semi-durable goods such as clothing, gadgets, electronics, toys, things of that nature. Slight some in the more recent years, in the past decade, perhaps also on the consumer side of goods, canned products, and what have you. But nonetheless, they have, of course, became world economic superpower. Perhaps some argue that the United States is still the only superpower after the Soviet Empire fell, or got dissoluted, if you will. But some would argue that China has risen also to be a superpower in its own rights. Well, that's perhaps matters of different political discussions. But back to the topic. So May, from my understanding, Meng, that is, was released on bail, $10 million bail, with several surveillance restrictions and curfew imposed and as such, because China was very angry at Canada. And now there's an ongoing, in the last 24 hours, there was an incident involving a Canadian diplomat in China. Supposedly, we're learning more. He has been detained by Chinese officials or authorities, and people have said that this is in direct retribution to us arresting Meng in Vancouver. Some pundits have called Meng member of the Chinese corporate royalty. Sure, Huawei is a huge mega transnational corporation, having become the second producer exporter of smartphones, and from my understanding Huawei is actually first in telecommunication the building of telecommunication equipment. And this is fascinating if they're first, if that's a fact check me on this one. But a lot of people are saying that Huawei is the first in the world telecommunication equipment and gadgets builder. So it can be towers like cell phone towers and all the components that go with it. And also of internet infrastructure. And now it's a more controversial point. There's allegations stemming, if my understanding is correct, from Britain actually, and from some Republican members such as Ted Cruz. If I'm not mistaken, Ted Cruz, if I am mistaken that this is his official statement, Mr. Cruzy, let Dragan give you a hug and then push you a bit back so we don't get too sticky icky. But nonetheless, if there has been allegations that, this again, advise me, tech masters, wizards, connoisseurs, feasibility know that technically it is of course possible for such matters as espionage, backdoors, and what have you into networks. But this is of course a big allegation from certain members of the Republicans in the United States and from certain security, and actually believe some politicians in Britain or organizations, I have to check because this matter is ongoing, that Huawei is actually doing some espionage, spying, that is on behalf of the Chinese government, by extension the Chinese Communist Party. I'm not going to rule it out, but I just do give all people the benefit of the doubt in case of allegations, accusations, and of course suspicions, because we have seemed to be growing into Cold War era suspicions in the United States, Russia, China, and the such. And such, it's a possibility. It's also a possibility that Huawei or members of the directorate are not aware that that's been happening in many ways, right? It could be that there was espionage involved in the corporate by XYZ government, and that members of the board of directors, for example, the director, the chief financial officer, for example, is Ms. Meng, that she was unaware of other things that were going on. It's totally possible when you have such large organizations that employ tens of thousands of people and work transnationally. Sometimes there's people abusing certain things. Again, the abuse, right? Such as abuse of power, abuse of authority, abuse of surveillance. When we come to the matter of public and privacy. As much as we value our privacy, we must value it, protect it, understand it. When we have public relations, the civic relations, our relations as citizens, with locally, nationally, and internationally, public sphere. And of course, because the founder of Huawei, Meng's father actually, Mr. Renfrey, again if I'm mispronouncing, I'm not doing because of not purposefully, Ring Fenghui, say Mr. was of course a member, from my understanding, of the Communist Party of China. He was actually involved in the, my understanding is correct, of the People's Army, the People's Liberation Army, what it was called. Sort of, don't like to make that comparison, but sort of like the Red Army of China, right? In many ways. The Red Army was of course the Soviet led by Trotsky, and formed of the People's Liberation Army, which was of course led by Mao, General Chairman Mao Zedong, right? Chairman Mao. And I'm saying China, I'm of course calling of good, cordial, and harmonious relations, Western, North American, and Western and Sino-North American relations, for good, harmonious, and cordial relations, politically, socially, and culturally. Because we must also understand, China is a huge, the most populated nation state, nation and civilization on earth now. 1.4 billion people. So almost, like, if not, yes, 1 out of 6 people live in China. 1 out of 6 people on the planet live in China. It's also it's an old civilization stretching back 3,000 years. Now in the West we say, oh, we got Egypt, and we do. In the Bible, Joseph, story where it's just being read now, you know. It goes back, story of Joseph, of course, Jacob, Pharaoh. That story is 3,700 years back in history or so, or 3,500. Give more or take a few decades. But also China, civilization also dates back to that ancient time when the script was developing, when civilization, Chinese civilization arose. Right? They're in a time of the Roman Empire, you know, many chauvinists. I'm using chauvinists because I want to bridge, so world citizen and LGBTQ world citizen want to bridge the gap between nations and peoples and states and tribes. And we come together, you know, to move forward, starting locally and nationally and internationally, for world peace, security, and prosperity. I say the Roman Empire. Sure, good, bad, X, Y, we can discuss. Emperors, periods, times, eras. Pax Romana, Roman peace, it established a peace. It seems so, sure. There was periods of relative peace in the world, yeah. For we forget that at the same time that the Roman Empire, people, oh, the Roman Empire, such grandiose, stretched across many nations today, from Rome, of course, to Germany, to Judea, present-day Israel, Palestine, Syria, Egypt, of course, Libya, Tunisia, Morocco, Romania. Of course, Romania, the name comes from the Roman Empire. Actually, the East, when it split in the East and the West Roman Empire, was Romania, was Eastern Byzantium. The official name was Romania, to denote New Rome, from Latin, right? Roma, yeah. But at the same time, China was also an empire, right? Huang Shu Huandi, the Emperor of China, you know that, underground, like an army, and supposedly each figurine has a different facial feature. Amazing. Tens of thousands of clay soldiers, distinct gear, and supposedly distinct facial features. Supposedly each and every one was modeled after an individual in his army, the Emperor's army. Imagine. Would love to see it, would love to witness it. Just to see the staggering of the work involved, the art involved. Not, of course, an advocate of empire building at all, and for world civilization now, that period of history of empires and nations and world wars and wars for imperialism we should put it in the past for humanity to advance together. One world, one race, one free mankind. So China at the same time the Roman Empire they had a civilization. And an empire that was perhaps as big, perhaps maybe bigger than the Roman Empire was in terms of things. So let's try to put all the antagonisms in the past toward the future, where the sun rises in the east, sets in the west, and vice versa. When it rises in the east, it sets in the west. When it rises in the west, it sets in the east, and vice versa. Or spiritually, philosophically. Or now I'm gonna just last brief commentary. I'm gonna switch the topic, but looking to see what's gonna come out of this. Markets last week, of course, were down, and down. Not just the Dow Jones, the TSX here in Canada, Toronto, we have the TXX, and we also have the Montreal Exchange. The New York, which is the biggest stock exchange in the world, was down. The Dow Jones, Nikkei, of course, in Japan, and other stock markets across the world took a negative downturn, sometimes for a prolonged few hundred points each and every day down. From my understanding, there's a rebound or positive bounce back, if you want to use it like that. Basically, some gains, not necessarily rooting or balancing of the losses from last week, but it seems that the arrest of Huawei's chief financial officer had a direct negative impact on markets and investor confidence and financial volatility worldwide. Now we'll see what's happening, what's going on. As to the spying allegations of espionage on behalf of the Communist Party of China. We'll see where that goes. Some people, of course, have to mention and look at multiple angles and multiple sides, of course, that we can discern and judge more fairly with less bias as we can. Of course, we are sometimes ruled by subconscious forces of xenophobia, chauvinism, and racism. So some people might be biased to move forward day by day. So it was implied, said by several, that Huawei was spying, and some have said, of course, that that's not the case. The case here is actually corporate. Huawei's overtaken Apple as the second producer exporter of smartphones, and that it's a corporation, a big business that's threatening big business, such as Apple and others. And it's actually economic, trade related, more than all other reasons, commercially related, more than other reasons. We'll see. Now I'm gonna switch topics and just gonna go to a brief discussion of there was in the PBS. I've seen a 10-minute video that from December 2nd It's on YouTube. You can check it out. PBS ISIS resurgence. And I'm not using ISIS. I'm using Islamic State, aka the Caliphate, terrorist Caliphate, of course, which we know brought terror to the whole world, which was seemed to have arisen out of an abyss of some place, which of course drew different nations, not nations necessarily, but soldiers from all over the world. When they went, they flocked there, right? In Syria, spawning from after the Arab Spring, the protests in Syria, and then the Middle East, right? In the Middle East. So ISIS also, because of my goddess, do not use the name, so use the Islamic State, supposedly has re-emerged. Now I'm asking you people, what's happening? How? I mean, in the past 3.5 years, the Caliphate attacking Paris, attacking other targets, soldiers of the Caliphate, so-called. We went there, I'm saying we, Canada, United States, NATO, and other coalition members, to fight Islamic State, right? But we were against Assad, or against the regime, supporting so-called Syrian democratic forces. Russia went in there with Iran and supposedly China, supporting Assad, but also against the Islamic State, because the Islamic State, of course, declared war to all of us, upon the whole world. They say that you accept the Caliphate's rule because they proclaim the Caliph, which goes back to ancient Islamic history, sort of like a pope, seen as the successor to Muhammad, so political and spiritual office fused in together. Of course, not for ennobling or freeing mankind, or for complete opposite, to enslave, to bring in barbaric laws, inhumane, totalitarian, authoritarian state, of course. And then different sides, the East, let's say, the East and the West went there to fight ISIS, Islamic State. Supposedly last November, most of the troops of Caliphate were destroyed. Raqqa, their self-declared capital, was in ruins, supposedly, right? Their self-declared capital of Raqqa in Syria, northwest. And now they re-emerged in the past weeks, supposedly regaining some territory. What's happening with all the forces on the ground? Of course, it's an ideological war, it's a conflict, sectarian war going on in the Middle East, a conflict in Iraq. Right? A lot of sectarianism has arisen after the strongmen of Saddam fell and Gaddafi fell. We've seen, of course, sectarianism, conflict, and chaos, civil wars in Libya, which is a disaster, terrible. Of course, the most terrible of all was the Caliphate, aka Islamic State. Nobody has ever seen anything like that. Such gruesome barbarity and cruelty. Right? It's interesting. I haven't read the book by McCants. I want to read it. It came out 2 years ago or something. That went to the beginnings and origins. I think William McCants, that's his name. I'm gonna check it out, maybe see if I can find it at the library. Would be curious to know about it. If you read it, let me know if it's worth reading, why, how come, what's up. But deeply alarmed by this resurgence, and had also a here in Montreal, I had to make a citizen security report, of course, when I found the propaganda on behalf of the caliphate. It was unbelievable. So how can people pass by this freely distributed newspaper, ISIL propaganda of the caliphate, calling on supporters to join the caliphate back then, like 2 years ago? Like, I don't know what was happening. What was our security force? What was the publisher thinking? He didn't read the article by this fellow. Of course, I've reported it. The newspaper stopped distributing for a month now. Was back after, and did my duty, of course, as anybody should. As in terms of the security matters, if people want us to enslave us, become slaves. So the seems that it has resurged. Gonna be keeping an eye, monitoring, informing more about the situation. But if that's the case, what do you think we should do? Ground troops, more troops to send over there. Remember discussing with a friend, I don't know, it was a war with his caliphate, and said the only way would be a mass mobilization. We'd have to have a new world order. And we would have to take, of course, some radical steps, such as the transmutation of debt, convert it into helping citizens and civilians integrate into security forces totally, for maintaining freedom, ensuring prosperity, and the continuation of civilization. And we were discussing, and we discussing more a plan we could mobilize. Would have to make an alliance, of course, with Israel, State of Israel, via also our existing ones, NATO. Canadians were part of NATO, the United States, NATO countries, Germany, Romania, other NATO countries, and other willing nations from Africa, of course, our brothers and sisters from Africa. And we would have to mobilize there and put ground troops in an alliance with Israel. So get Canadian, American, EU troops. From North America on the ground and establish an alliance with Israel in the Galilee. The Galilee is a region. Of course, Israel is a very, very small country, nice, geographically speaking, right? It's one of the smallest in the Middle East. But there's plains there. There are plains in the Galilee, a little bit more northern part of Israel, where we envision that the mobilization could take place. And from there, we could really fight the Islamic State from there. So that would be in our opinion, my good friends, the only way we could defeat the Islamic State, for them to set up bases of terrorism and attack us worldwide, to have a joint. This would be also civilians and joint integrated into the army, a joint allied army with a base established, bases that is there in the Galilee, in central, actually it's northern Israel. Chinese Caliphate soldiers are re-emerging, regrouping. Something we could explore, we could discuss. Maybe we'll have to come to that. Refinancing citizens to become also involved in security forces. Now, Yemen is in my last topic, calling for peace. Peace, such a tragedy in Yemen, calling for peace. 3.5 years ago, or 3 years and 7 months ago, the conflict started. It was several groups. 3.5 years ago, a bit more than 3.5 years ago, the group Houthis, the Houthis, which are a semi-religious political armed group, which kind of had a revolution and a coup, and that's when the conflict started, with several groups fighting. 3.5 years ago, of course, Saudi Arabia intervened, had an intervention with different other member nations in the Middle East, such as Qatar. I think Qatar now is out because of a diplomatic crisis, but other Saudi Arabia-led intervention in Yemen, and it's a disaster. 3.5 years ago, conflict, and since calling for peace there, for conflict resolution. And we'll now just finish off, wrapping it up by doing a reading on the news. CTV News, faulty tampons recalled across Canada, US. My goodness, our sisters. Former Trump lawyer Michael Cohen gets 3 years in prison. I'm going to study more the Cohen situation. That's a lot of lying involved in court under subpoena, under oath. Cheers. World peace, security, prosperity.